So, if you haven't watched Part A, I would recommend doing that first. This is Part B in Storytime 60, so if you haven't watched Part A, I would highly recommend that you watch that part first. And with that all said, we've reached March. March 2024 was a very big month for me, as at the end of the month, it would be a really big decision. That I would truly never thought I would have ever made, but it was a decision that was many years in the making that's allowed me to take control of my own life. I'll talk about it later. For now, I want to talk about spring break. So, spring break was a week-long break from Monday, March 4th, to Friday, March 8th. I was initially kind of nervous for the spring break, as I had a really bad spring break back in 2023, as I got in a big argument with my mom and went back to school early because of it. Luckily, this spring break would go a lot better. I didn't have any issues at home, and overall, I had a great spring break. However, that Friday, March 8th, would be a pretty big day. So if you've seen pretty much any other story time, March 8th is a very significant day for me, as it was on this day in 2018 that I attempted to take my own life. But despite being a bad day back in 2018, I've sworn to myself that I want to make it a good day for every following year and treat it like a mental health day, and each year I've treated it as such. However, I would go on to do something really big on March 8th, 2023. The 5-year anniversary of my suicide attempt. On this day, I published a book called The Charm, which while very much fictional, it's based directly off this incident, the build up to it, and my 8th grade school year as a whole, because that school year was by far the most challenging school year of my entire academic career. I started work on it near the end of 2021, so it was a very long process that took much work and dedication. Therefore, to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of publishing it, as well as the 6-year anniversary of my attempt, I decided to make a retrospective video for The Charm, where I reflected over my work a year after its publication, and discussed what I think I did well and what I could have improved on. It was an extremely well-made video that I was really impressed with, and it seems like you all really enjoyed it too, as I got a lot of views and a lot of likes on it. I'll link it in the description if you'd like to watch it for yourself. My family also celebrated with me that day too, as they like celebrating that day with me as a way to celebrate the fact that I'm still alive and didn't die when I was 13 years old. So overall, it was a good day like it's always been since 2019. Other than that day, nothing else really happened during spring break. A lot of college students would go off to Florida or go on vacation for spring break, and even though I'd love to go on vacation for spring break, I just didn't want to fork in the money, so I never bothered. Therefore, I just spent the week at my parents' house watching anime and taking a break from school and work. Then that Saturday, March 10th, I headed back up to UNC Charlotte to take on the second half of the semester. Now, the second half of this semester was much better than the first half. While not as much crazy stuff happened this half of this first as the first half, my mood in general was just much better and I was a lot happier than the first half. This is always the case for the spring semesters, as I usually was much happier from the second half than the first half. Anyways, I'll first discuss strategic management. So in February, Globus started up, and each week, me and my group were making decisions. My group had a tendency to do well, as our strategy revolved around spending extra money on social development such as wage increases for our employees, building a child care facility for our employees' children, using green renewable energy, and other stuff like that. We also put a lot of money into research and development, as we believe that spending a lot of money on it would provide us with a big competitive advantage. And overall, it seemed like these strategies worked well, as we were in 3rd place throughout the month and consistently made good decisions. Now, also in strategic management, we took our second exam. Just as the case with the first one, it was a take-home exam that required the use of the UNC Charlotte-sponsored malware called Lockdown Browser. I chose to take it on the Monday, March 18th. Unfortunately, I did not do as well on this exam, only making an 86, but it was still pretty good nonetheless, even if it was quite a forgettable exam. However, the final exam for strategic management would be way more memorable, and I'll discuss it when we get to April. Then in managerial accounting, we took our second exam. This exam was a lot more challenging than the first exam, as it covered more new topics, as well as revisited some topics from Principles of Accounting 2 that I struggled in, including price and quantity variances, my worst topic from that class. As a result, I only made a 74 on this exam, but just like the first exam, our professor added extra credit, I received the same amount of extra credit, being 22 points, so this skyrocketed my grade, and after the second exam, I was sitting at 105 in this class. Unfortunately, it would not sit in the triple digits forever, as we're going to see it steeply decline when we get to the final exam in May. Oh, and it was also around this month I stopped having feelings for my professor. It wasn't anything that she did, as I still think even now that she's really cute. I just simply grew out of those feelings, which I'm glad I did, since it's definitely not normal for a student to have a crush on their professor. God, I hope she doesn't watch this video, which is thankfully unlikely since she doesn't know about my YouTube channel or anything about me outside class. Next, I'll discuss intermediate microeconomics. So during this month, we took our second exam. This exam was way easier than the first one, as it was on theory of firms. This is very similar to what we did in managerial economics, making this unit way easier. Therefore, I did much better on this exam, making a 91 on it. It wasn't anything memorable, so I'll leave it at that. However, I did run into my professor after I finished the exam. So our professor was really late to class that day, and since she knew she'd run late, she had the TA administer the exam, but as I left Friday after finishing, she was walking towards Friday. We both said hello and she congratulated me on the exam. Afterwards, she went inside to take over administering the exam. Definitely a really funny situation, but still cool to say hello to her. Now the last class I'll discuss for this month is auditing. So on Wednesday, March 27th, we took our second and last exam for the class. This class didn't have a final exam, as we instead did a project that I'll go into more detail when we get to April. Anyways, like the first exam, this exam also stressed the fuck out of me. Given how the first exam went, I desperately wanted to do better on this exam, especially since I didn't do that well in the first exam, even if I did better than anticipated. So, like the first exam, I studied like hell for this exam. Well, not entirely like hell, as I actually didn't study as hard for this exam, but I did study hard. Studying for this exam was far easier than the first exam because I knew how my professor did things and how this exam was going to work, so I studied all the in-class exercises we did throughout the month, as well as memorized the chapter questions. I also paid special attention to management assertions, since I was told that this exam was going to focus very heavily on those, so I studied my ass off on those, even going as far as to memorizing each assertion's definition word for word. Yeah, I went that far on it. And overall, this hard work would pay off immensely. The exam was by far much easier than the first one, as I felt so much more prepared for it and was able to confidently complete all but one section. And as it would turn out, my abilities paid off well, as I ended up making an 83 on this exam. I was more than pleased to receive this grade, as not only did I work hard on it, but I was also so much more confident about it, and I also just genuinely thought this was a much more fair exam than the first one, which says a lot because this class is probably the most unfair class I ever took. In fact, I even started to have a more positive view of my professor after this exam, just because of how much more fair he was with this exam, although it would quickly go away when we got to the project. Now, although March 27th was a big day because of this exam, it was also by far the most important day of the entire month because of the events that happened after the exam. So I'll start with the not so big one, that being the tutoring session afterwards. So as mentioned earlier, I had a recurring appointment on Wednesdays after auditing with a girl for Intermediate Accounting 1. This session was particularly very silly, as my mind was really mushy after the exam, so I struggled quite a bit in the session. Luckily, my 2D took this really well since she knew I had this exam since our session the week prior, so we joked about it throughout the session. In fact, whenever I accidentally did something wrong, I'd blame the auditing exam. So it was a fun session, which says a lot because every single session I had with this 2D was always super fun, since she was always really fun to tutor and make fun of. By the way, our sessions would consist of us both making fun of each other since we both enjoyed that, which again, made these sessions really fun. Then after that session, I decided that I needed to celebrate finishing up that auditing exam by ordering some food, so I got on the mobile app and ordered some dinner from the on-campus Wendy's. I then made my way over to the student union, but as I passed by the stairs and made my way to where Wendy's and Bojangles is, a campus missionary stopped me and started talking about God. Now, I have not been to church since the beginning of this month. A lot of that is because I started to seriously doubt Christianity entirely. While I deconstructed and doubted my fundamentalist Southern Baptist roots back during the summer of 2023, I was now doubting the religion entirely and had come to the conclusion that I did not want to be a Christian anymore. Anyways, this missionary spoke for around 30 seconds till he asked me if I was a Christian. It was here where I said something I thought I would have never said in my entire life, that being, "No sir, I'm not a Christian and I am not interested in being one." I immediately felt guilty. As I had done the unthinkable, I just said I wasn't a Christian. The missionary understood and said goodbye, to which afterwards, I got my Wendy's and headed back to my dorm for the rest of the night. But for the next 30 minutes, I would reflect on those words. It was the first time I ever said that I was not a Christian, but when I said these words, it was a super weird feeling. At the same time that I felt extremely guilty for rejecting Christianity, whose fundamentals I was raised on, I also felt free. The fact that I was no longer shackled by the chains of Christianity felt so free, and I felt like I was now in control of my life, rather than some deity we don't even know exists or not. It went away after 30 minutes, where I stopped pondering it and just enjoyed the rest of my night, but it would go through my mind throughout the rest of the semester and continues to be a big thing for me even today. Now, that also begs the question, what do I identify as? Well, during this time, I decided to identify as non-religious, as I had absolutely no interest in affiliating myself with any religion, especially after all the pain and suffering and trauma I induced as a Christian. However, in May, I would start identifying as an atheist, and that's what I consider myself now. Overall, making this decision would go on to be a great one, as leaving Christianity would allow me to accept myself for who I am and help immensely with my religious trauma. It's allowed me to accept the fact that I don't have to be perfect and I do not have to know the answers to everything. In fact, leaving Christianity has taught me to question everything instead and use critical thinking rather than rely on a single book for all the answers to everything. It was absolutely scary at first though, as I was especially scared about hell and the possibility of going there in the future since that's what I was indoctrinated with as a kid. But as I'd get over that fear pretty quickly, and now, hell doesn't scare me one bit since I don't believe it exists. I'd eventually publicly announced me leaving the faith a month later, and was received with a lot of support. Currently, my parents do not know that I am an atheist, although I'm sure they figured it out already. This past summer, they didn't force me to attend church, so I took advantage of this by not going to church at all. Additionally, Dad asked me once about my lack of church attendance, and while I didn't say that I had left Christianity entirely, I did tell him that I wasn't interested in church or religion. Also, during every family dinner, we would pray before eating, and sometimes they would have me pray. However, my parents did not have me pray at all this summer during family meals, and we ate dinner together 6 times a week throughout the summer. I'm sure if they thought I was still a Christian, they'd probably have me pray some, but they didn't, which leads me to believe that they know about me leaving the faith, which will hopefully make things easier when I eventually personally tell them. Now, just a few days later, there was already a problem. So Sunday, March 31st was Easter. My parents wanted me to come home so I could attend church with them, as they were really pushing it and making it almost like I had to attend. However, after officially leaving the faith, I knew I did not want to be affiliated with or attend church at all. In fact, the Friday before on March 29th, I had a therapy appointment and revealed to my therapist about becoming irreligious. One big topic we discussed in this session was setting boundaries. This is by far one of the most important skills that non-religious people who live in religious households or have religious family members need to know, as nobody should be forced to practice a religion against their will. We particularly touched on going to church and how to set that boundary against my parents. Therefore, I decided to practice that this weekend, although I didn't exactly do it in the way discussed in therapy just because I didn't want to have to tell my parents I wasn't a Christian. What I instead did was lie about my auditing exam and tell them that it was on Monday, April 1st. Now, I'm usually really bad at lying, which is why I tend to avoid it as much as possible. However, I figured that this would be the best bet since I had complained so much to them about the first exam, so they knew how brutal these exams were. Although they were still wanting me to go back home to attend church, they understood and let me be. Therefore, I got out of going to church on Easter and instead spent the weekend in my room. It was definitely a weird feeling though, as it was my first Easter that I wasn't a Christian, and the first Easter that I did not go to church at. And this December will also be weird in a similar way, as it'll be my first Christmas as an atheist. I'll still be hanging out with family and doing the typical, but I won't be attending church, so keep it at that. Now, as you might expect, leaving your religion is a big deal for people who have done it because it influences our ways of life, our beliefs, our purpose, and how we view ourselves. And it absolutely did just that for me, as I now hold many different beliefs and views ever since I left Christianity. However, it would take way too much time for me to go over everything that changed, so I'll instead make another story time about leaving Christianity and who I am today in the future. It'll be somewhat of a follow-up to Storytime 58, but I'll be critically examining the religion as a whole and how I left it entirely instead of leaving a denomination like I did in it. So that was the biggest thing that happened this semester. While it was a decision that was almost 6 years in the making, starting all the way back to Ilfuge 2018, the youth trip that turned me away from church, it was definitely worth it, as it allowed me to be in control of my life and allowed me to think for myself. In fact, I'm even writing a sequel to The Charm right now, and it'll be about this decision, and I'll also release another storytime sometime in the future discussing it more in detail, my reasons for leaving, what has happened since then, similarly to how Christians share their testimonies. Now, other than this big decision, not much happened for the rest of the month after the auditing exam, especially since my next exam wouldn't be for an entire month, so I now had a whole lot of time to relax and prepare to end my time at UNC Charlotte. However, at the end of the month, work would start to pick up a little more when I signed up to lead the reading day review session for statistics. So at the end of each semester, the tutoring department hosts reading day review sessions for a select number of math-heavy classes that have large class sizes. Some examples of classes that have reading day review sessions include Calc 1 and 2, Linear Algebra, Organic Chemistry 1 and 2, Intermediate Accounting 1, Engineering Physics 1 and 2, and more. I led the session for Principles of Accounting 1 at the end of the spring 2023 semester, and led the Business Calc session at the end of the fall 2023 semester, where I described both sessions in their respective story times. So for the spring 2024 reading day review session, I decided that I wanted to lead the session for statistics. Statistics was by far the most popular class I tutored, as it consisted of over half of my drop-in attendees and made up the largest share of my appointment tutoring. Therefore, I figured it would be a great class to lead the session for. I also just wanted to lead the session for a different class, so I figured that this one would be perfect. The reading day session itself would actually take place on Tuesday, April 30th. However, I signed up for it near the end of March, and for the rest of the month and throughout April, I worked on a packet that I would use during the session, as well as allow the tutoring department to make it available to students prior to the session. I also created an answer key with explanations and calculator shortcuts too to allow students to check their work as well. I'll talk about how the session went at the end of April. And with that wraps up March and takes us into April. April 2024 was quite a big month, as while I only had one exam during this month, each class, with the exception of Intermediate Microeconomics, had a project, so that'll provide quite a bit for me to discuss for each class. To start, I'll talk about managerial accounting. So at the beginning of the semester, we were assigned into groups of 4, although we wouldn't do anything until this month when we worked on our project. Anyways, this project involved us basically researching a publicly traded company and analyzing its financial records and determining if we should invest in them. To do this, we were tasked with looking at the company's industry trends, its financial ratios, its stock history, bond history, and other stuff we felt should be considered in our decision, and then decide if we were going to invest in it, US Treasury bonds, or the S&P 500. Now, the company me and my group did was Capital One. I don't exactly remember how we decided on them, but that's what the company we looked into. We basically looked into all the above mentioned and some more. However, this would prove to be quite tough. So Capital One is a lot different than other companies we focused on in this class and the Intermediate Accounting Trilogy, as in those classes, we focus mainly on merchandising companies who have inventory and sell that inventory to make profit. Capital One is nothing like this, as it's a bank. As we all know, banks don't have inventories. Additionally, banks work differently than other companies, as their accounts and notes receivables, assets, are loans lent out to individuals, and businesses, while their accounts and notes payables, liabilities, are deposits people and businesses make. Therefore, this made it difficult for the rest of my group, but luckily, I have an economics background. Banking is a big part of macroeconomics, as we use the banking system to regulate monetary policy and analyze aggregate cash flows for the nation. I knew the system very well as how the Fed changes interest rates, which was a big deal for this project because a lot of the banking and finance industry's trends follow the Fed's decisions. Therefore, we as a group decided that I would write the entire report, and they would create the presentation. For this project, we had to have a written multi-page report as well as a business presentation we would share with the class. For some reason, our professor had the business presentation due first, but it made a lot more sense to do the report first since we could use it to build the presentation. So that's what me and my group decided. I spent roughly 6 hours on Saturday, April 13th, writing the report. Luckily, I didn't have to write the entire thing, as one of my partners volunteered to find the financial ratios and add some more sources, which helped immensely. But after that afternoon, the report was completed and I let my peers read over it, and they were all really impressed and very satisfied with it. So they started work on the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint turned out great, as they simply brought the information from my report over to the presentation, so it was an easy process. And then on Tuesday, April 23rd, we gave a presentation. Now, this was a business professional presentation, so we four had to dress up. My parents happened to have bought me some new dress clothes for Christmas a few months back, so I wore them to this presentation. We were the third group to present. How we organized this was that we had someone introduce the group and the company. Then we had the other partner discuss the financial statements. Then the guy who gave me the financial ratio information discussed the financial ratios and how they compare to other companies in the industry. Then came my turn, where I analyzed Capital One's investment securities and compared them to US Treasury bonds in the S&P 500. Afterwards, the person who introduced us talked about some of the social awareness projects Capital One has done, since all four of us believe that we should also take into account the company's contributions to society in our decision too. Then I wrapped up the presentation by discussing our decision. We ultimately decided to invest in Capital One stocks for the short term. While the S&P 500 was a little safer, Capital One offered a slightly higher reward, and since we planned to hold these stocks as trading securities, we figured we'd get them. But we decided not to invest in Capital One bonds, and instead invest in US Treasury bonds because not only were these bonds safer, given that they were US Treasury bonds, but they had a higher yield rate, so we decided to go with them instead, especially since we plan to keep these bonds as held to maturity. Overall, it was a fantastic presentation that I feel that I and the rest of my group did very well in. Our professor agreed and gave us a 100 for the presentation and 105 for the report. She gave us 5 extra points on the report because I, managed to impress her immensely with it. In addition to providing the usual, I actually went as far as to use statistics to make my decision, even using a t-test on the stocks and an f-test on the bonds. She also liked how we cited our sources on both the report and the presentation, which wasn't required, but we did it anyways, so she gave us extra points for that too. Overall, this was a fantastic project that I think we as a group definitely did incredibly well on. Next, let's talk about intermediate macroeconomics. So remember how I said that the weekly Excel assignments we did would eventually prove to be useful? Well, here's how they were. So at the end of the month, we had to do a report where we pretended to be on the board of the Fed, and our job was to determine whether or not the Fed should cut, raise, or keep interest rates steady. We had to back our claim using all the charts we created throughout the semester, as well as using material from the class. Now, I am not going to share much about the specifics from my report, as Fed decisions, as well as the Fed itself, are extremely controversial and often political in nature. Therefore, I will not state what decision I came up with, as I prefer to stay away from politics in Storytime. However, what I'll instead explain is how I came to my conclusion and what information I used. So I started out by explaining the current state of the economy, where I brought up the current unemployment rate and inflation rates at the time, since these measures have changed quite a bit since then. I then depicted my first graph, which showed the change in the unemployment rate since 1952. I would do the same for the inflation rate, GDP per capita, and monthly consumption growth over time using the data from the Fed and developing econometric models based off them. This was for the first 70% of the report, as I simply discussed the current state of the economy and looked at the 70-year trends for those different measures. Then the next 25% of the report looked at recent activity by the Fed, where I analyzed recent decisions by the Fed and how they've been affecting the economy, using graphs to depict these as well. Then the last 5% of the report was me providing my decision. I also had a bibliography page at the end, which we weren't required to have, but I put it in anyway since I always like giving credit to any research I do. And overall, I did really well in this report, making a 94 on it. I got some points taken off because I actually got the Fed's unemployment rate goals wrong, which ended up influencing my decision immensely. But I still did well arguing my points, using my graphs to enhance my reasoning, and even using statistics to help with my decisions, all of which are things economists have to use in order to make well-informed economic decisions. So I think I did well in this report, even if I got extremely bored rereading it when writing the story time because this report is really boring, which is to be expected given what it's about. Now, the next class I'll discuss is Strategic Management, which was the only class I had an exam for this month. That exam being the final. So the final for Strategic Management worked just like the first two exams, where it was take-home but required lockdown browser. Therefore, we could spend as much time as we wanted until the due date for it. However, what made this exam different is that this exam was cumulative, so it included material from throughout the class. However, there were also 2 chapters we went over after the second exam, which I anticipated would make up a higher share of the exam because we hadn't been tested on it yet. Spoiler alert, I was right. Now, I want to talk about studying for this exam, because I think I studied for and took the exam in probably the most college student way possible. For the studying process, I made a Quizlet that consisted of all the questions from the first 2 exams, as I anticipated that many of them would reappear on this exam. I predicted this because many questions from our weekly quizzes would appear on the exams, so I figured our professor might reuse these questions for the final. In addition, I made another Quizlet that consisted of every question on each of the weekly quizzes. And finally, I added the terms and definitions from the last 2 chapters onto a Quizlet set I made for the previous chapters for the previous exams, allowing me to study all of these at once. Now, I studied for a grand total of 6 hours for this exam, most of which involved me just making the Quizlet sets. I consider this studying because just making Quizlet sets actually helps with learning and retaining information, in addition to using Learn and taking hypothetical tests on Quizlet. But I did all of this between Tuesday, April 23rd at 8 p.m. to Wednesday, April 24th at 2 a.m. And after working on Quizlet sets and working hard, you would think that I was satisfied and ready to take the exam the next day. Well, you'd be right. However, I chose not to wait and instead just go ahead and take the exam. Yes, I started this exam at 2:12 a.m. Not the most conventional time for most people, but with me being a big night owl, this time worked perfectly for me since I tend to be in a better mood and work more efficiently at night. So that's why I chose to take this exam at 2 a.m. out of all times I could have selected. Now, this exam consisted of 100 multiple choice questions, making it double the previous 2 exams, but I expected this. In addition, my prediction about the questions from the previous exam being on here would be accurate, as a good amount of the questions on the final were actually on the first 2 exams. I would also see a good amount of questions from the weekly quizzes and some definition questions too, allowing me to get through this exam pretty quickly. And by quickly, I answered all 100 questions and went back and checked each of them in just 35 minutes, averaging to only 15 seconds per question when I was initially answering the questions and 6 seconds per questions to check them. Once I felt ready to submit, when the clock was at 2:47 a.m., I pressed submit and managed to make a 93 on this exam. Yeah, a 93 on an exam I took at 2 in the morning. It was definitely a nice flex since I could tell Mio, Jared, and Anna about taking the exam and telling them I took it at 2 a.m., which the 3 of them were quite shocked about and impressed when I told them I made a 93. I shared the Quizlet with the 3 of them so that they would use it to study. And with that, I was done with the final, and I'm also getting a fucking phone call right now. I'll have to call them later. Additionally, I was done with the class in of itself, too. While Globus was looking really bad at the beginning of the month, as me and my group made some really bad decisions at the beginning of the month, we quickly corrected it and managed to get 3rd place overall, meaning we had successfully completed Globus. But in addition to Globus itself, we also had to give a presentation to the class discussing our Globus strategy and explain our decisions throughout the semester. However, this presentation was worth a very small fraction of our grade, so much so that it wouldn't have even affected mine or any of my group's grade. Our professor knew this and gave us the option not to present, all we had to do was email him to let him know that we weren't presenting. So me and my group decided that we wouldn't do the presentation. So I emailed our professor, and after taking us off the presenting list and congratulating me and my group for making it to our last semester, I was officially done with strategic management. My final grade came out as a 91, giving me an A for this capstone class and making it the first class I wrapped up this semester. Now, the last class I want to touch on is auditing. So, as mentioned earlier, the second exam we took in this class back in March was actually the last exam in this class, as the rest of the class involved us doing a project. The project basically had us work in groups of 4 where we were given some information about a company and had to audit its information based on 4 assertions: existence, completeness, accuracy, and valuation. I was in a group with Mio, Ting, and Jared. I chose to do accuracy, whereas my teammates did completeness, valuation, and existence respectively. I chose accuracy in particular because my former crush took this class the semester prior and she did accuracy when she did this project. In fact, during one of our walks after strategic management, she gave me some tips for the project and offered to help me in my group on it. I took her offer, and so throughout the project, she would provide tips and even showed me some of the things she did on the project. As a result, she would prove to be very valuable on this project. Now, this project had 2 parts, a revenue section and an expenditure section. For each part, we had to use Alteryx in order to clean out data and use it for our specific assertions. There were 2 parts to our grade, an individual portion that was worth 25% of each part's grade, and a group portion that was worth 75% of each part's grade that consisted of ours and our group's combined score. Throughout the project, we had to take screenshots of our procedures and explain them on a workflow document, in addition to submitting the Alteryx workflow in of itself, similar to how snapshots work in public accounting. Now, I've told you this stuff, but you've probably confused about what specifically we had to do, since this is all very broad, and that's the biggest problem with this project and what made it an absolute monstrosity. Our professor did not provide any clear or direct instructions for this project. You see, we had to perform 4 procedures related to our assertion, but we had to figure out what procedures to perform and figure out how to do them in Alteryx ourselves. But it wasn't like there was an infinite number of procedures to choose from. No, our professor knew what procedures to use for each assertion. He just expected us to somehow read his fucking mind and come up with the right procedures. This made things far more stressful, since we had to literally come up with procedures and perform them, but it wasn't guaranteed that we were doing the right ones or the ones our professor wanted us to perform. This ambiguity made the entire project far more stressful than it needed to be, since neither me nor my group knew if we were even doing it right throughout the entirety of the project, and had nowhere or nothing to compare to make sure we were doing it right. It also did not help that none of us were comfortable with Alteryx, so I talked a little bit about Alteryx in Storytime 57, as we did some stuff with it in AIS and in tax, but my professors for those classes guided us through AIS, or through Alteryx, provided step-by-step tutorials, and taught us how the program worked and what to do and what not to do with it. They did not expect us to become an expert at or even be comfortable with the software. They just wanted to introduce it to us. Meanwhile, my auditing professor expected us to already be very comfortable with Alteryx and be able to perform audits from it. If we were doing this entirely in Excel, it would not have been so bad, since at this point, me and all my classmates were skilled at Excel. But the fact that he expected us to be comfortable with this software that we had extremely limited exposure to was just ridiculous and showed that he was very out of touch with the student body. Oh, and even worse, he only made videos for the first step. Basically, the data he gave us was unclean and needed to have all the pre-current year entries removed. So he went over it in class and made videos, which helped immensely since he's a good teacher who can explain things well. But for everything afterwards, we were on our own and he refused to provide any guidance or resources on the procedures. I also want to comment on just how useless our professor was with the project too. So in order to be quote-unquote a resource, he added extended office hours to his schedule. All of his office hours were appointment-based and virtual, which sucked since in-person office hours would have been way more helpful since this is a hands-on project. But in addition to this, he required us to attend in groups so we couldn't just sign up individually, making this more obnoxious. But what really made these bad was just how unprofessional and unhelpful he was. So on Wednesday, April 17th, we did not have class, as he intended to offer extra office hours during this time. Me and Mio signed up for the 5 o'clock slot. the slots were in 15-minute intervals, so this should have lasted until 5:15, which was perfect for me since I had my intermediate accounting tutoring appointment at 5:30, so me and Mio hopped on at 5 o'clock and waited for our professor. However, he would be late, and by late, I mean he didn't make it until 5:25. According to Mio, he was busy with another group and couldn't get back to us until 10 minutes after our session was supposed to end. I had to get off at 5:15 so I could get to my tutoring appointment. But this really pissed me off because it showed just how little our professor respected us and our time. I can understand being 5 minutes late, but being 25 minutes late to a 15-minute appointment is extremely disrespectful and unprofessional. Luckily, he was able to get to Mio and was fine working with her just once. Once Mio explained my situation to him and when he noticed I wasn't there. So at least she was able to get some help. But still, it was so disrespectful for him to be this late and not care about our schedules. He didn't even apologize to me either, which is the very least he could have done. I seriously hope he never gets tenured. Not because I hated his class, but because he lacks very basic professionalism that a tenured professor should demonstrate. In fact, he shouldn't even be a professor anyways if he wants to be this disrespectful to his students. I get that I might be being petty, but me and Mio had to sign up for this session 4 days in advance, and our professor could have also just gotten back to the group he was working after he finished with us and his future groups, as he had 4 more groups after us as well. So I think I have a bias in my argument that our professor does not respect his students. Not a bias, but a basis in my argument that our professor does not respect his students. Now, as you might expect, doing this project was obnoxious. Even with me being in a group with 3 extremely smart individuals, we 4 struggled because we had absolutely zero direction whatsoever. My former crush at least was able to come in and help me come up with ideas for procedures, but I still struggled because our professor changed the project up from the previous semester. But at least I got some good ideas from my former crush, so her help was still incredibly useful. And luckily, me and my group were able to come up with ideas and procedures for our assertions, but then came the tough part, doing them in Alteryx. Of course, not having much experience with Alteryx made this really annoying, but we tried. Many of my procedures dealt with using the joint command, which took a lot of practice, but once I got used to it, it made things much easier, and I can even say that despite all the trouble and frustration, I did get better with Alteryx from this project. However, there was one massive issue with my project. Well, 2 actually, as I had 2 procedures that dealt with the wrong assertion. One of my procedures attempted to verify that the sales revenue in sales journal accurately reflected the sales on the unofficial income statement, and another procedure did the same for accounts receivable. These procedures actually go along with valuation, but I only realized this until after I submitted my part of the project. When I realized this, I felt extremely bad and thought I fucked over the group. Even though my group was more than understanding of the situation, I apologized profusely to them and was worried sick about the project, especially since I couldn't resubmit my section. But luckily, I had nothing to worry about, as our professor would not grade these projects. Instead, he had his TA grade them. I don't know if she really knew what she was doing or what, but she gave me a 24 out of 25 for my part of the project, the highest among my group. I was absolutely flabbergasted because I thought I would not get more than 12 points due to having 2 bad procedures and possible points taken off for the others. But no, she gave me all but 1 point for my section. I guess she didn't realize that 2 of my procedures were for valuation, which I can understand since I initially thought they were for accuracy. But still, you wouldn't believe how relieved I was when I saw my grade, as it was one of the most relieving feelings I ever had because I stressed so much about this project. And the best part is that me and my group would do very well as a whole on this project, as our group score was a 65 out of 75, meaning I had an 89 on this part, the most stressful assignment I did at UNC Charlotte, and I made almost an A on it. God, it felt so relieving, and me and my group was also really happy too. Again, I don't know if our TA just gave us free points or if our professor told her to grade really lightly, but whatever the case was, I wasn't complaining at all. Then the second part of the project followed the same path, but for expenses. This was monumentally easier than the revenue section because since we had now done one part, we knew what to do, how to do it, and what our TA was looking for. Therefore, me and my group had a much easier time with this part. But interestingly enough, we didn't do as well, as I only got a 21 out of 25, which was again the highest individual grade for my group. As a whole, we got a 50 out of 75. don't know why, but it was really still more than enough for me and allowed me to pass the class with an 85 as my final grade, which gave me a B in by far the hardest and most frustrating class I took at UNC Charlotte. So that's all I have for academics. Let's talk about work, as April would mark the very end of my time as a tutor. To start, I'll talk about the build-up to the Reading Day review session. So on Thursday, April 18th, my boss gathered me and all the Reading Day leaders to give us a little overview of how Reading Day sessions work. She did these every semester for us Reading Day leaders, as I attended one of these training sessions during the spring 2023 and fall 2023 semesters. So it wasn't really a necessity for me, but I still attended anyway because not only was it required, but I got paid to attend the training, got free snacks, and I really wanted to focus on making the session the best Reading Day session ever since it was my last opportunity to lead one. Therefore, I wanted to soak up as much as possible. And overall, it was pretty fun. I always loved whenever my boss would showcase previous semester numbers, since it gave an idea of how many attendees we could expect to have. It was especially fun when she showed the attendance for members or numbers for the spring 2023 and fall 2023 sessions, because I was able to look at the sessions I led and be like, I led that session. But overall, session went great. Now, afterwards, I decided that I wanted to go see the room I would be holding my session in so I could get a good idea of the room size and what would work and not work. My assigned room was in Denny 200, which funnily enough was directly across from Denny 220, the exact lecture hall I had statistics in when I took it during the fall 2022 semester. So it was really cool leading the Reading Day session for this course right next to the classroom I took the course in. My buddy Logan was also headed here too to visit where his Reading Day session was taking place. He led the session for General Physics 1, and he was on the bottom floor, so we walked over there together after the training. Anyways, my room was really nice. I had a huge projector and the classroom itself was really big, fitting around 150 students. I also had a huge whiteboard, although I chose not to use it for the actual Reading Day session. Over the next week and a half, I'd make frequent visits to this classroom to play around with the technology and get everything set up prior to the actual Reading Day session. In addition, I finished up the Reading Day review packet and the solutions to them, so I was able to send them to a GA, and then she was able to upload them to the Tutoring Center's website, allowing students to go ahead and practice the packet. Now, before I talk about the Reading Day session itself, I first want to share some stories from tutoring. All of my 2Ds knew that my time as a tutor was coming to an end, and they all treated me even better than they usually did during this time, and would all wish me well after the end of our last session. But there's two sessions in particular I want to point out because these appointments really stuck with me and still stick to me even half a year after retiring from tutoring. These two appointments were honestly the most memorable appointments I had and are appointments I'm probably going to remember for the rest of my life. The first one I'll discuss involves by far the most hilarious story a 2D has ever told me during the session. So this was with my statistics 2D I saw at 1 o'clock, who I also tutored business calc the previous semester. He was always a very enjoyable 2D to help since he always had quite a good amount of jokes and funny stories. But during our last session, which was on April 24th, he told me by far the funniest story I ever heard from a 2D. So at the same time he was taking statistics, my 2D was also taking management and organizational behavior. Now, this class entails a lot of presentation since it's a very project and presentation heavy course. That wasn't the case for me since I took this class, but that's because I took it online over the summer. Had I taken it in person, I likely would have had more presentations similar to him. Anyways, for his last presentation, he had to work with 3 other students to create a presentation discussing sustainability and why it's important for managers and businesses to focus on environmental sustainability. But in order to convey this topic, my 2D and his group decided to theme it around pop culture. And by pop culture, they chose the Lorax, which I gotta say is probably the best idea they could have come up with. For those who haven't seen The Lorax, it's a movie about a mythical creature called the Lorax, whose natural habitat is being deforested by a greedy corporation that runs the city where all the humans live. Throughout the show, the main character, a human, attempts to stop the deforestation and protect the Lorax's home. Now, my 2D and his group could have simply played a clip of the Lorax and go on about their topic. However, they decided that instead, they were going to go way above and beyond. One way they did this was by buying costumes and dressing up as characters from the show. My 2D dressed up as that one guy who sung How Bad Can I Be? Another group member dressed up as the Lorax, another guy dressed up as the greedy CEO, and another dressed up as Freddy, the main character. Unfortunately, my 2D did not sing How Bad Can I Be, but it was still hilarious hearing that he and his group dressed up as characters from the show for this presentation. But right when I thought that was that, my 2D had even more to say about it. You see, they didn't just dress up in their costumes. No, they also acted out in character. When reading their lines about sustainability, they would act out as their character they were playing, mimic their voice, and basically pretend to be that character. But by far the best part of the entire presentation was at the end where my 2D chased the Lorax across the lecture hall. This had everyone, including the professor, dying laughing. But what made it even funnier was that halfway through the chase, my 2D tripped over the stairs, making everyone continue laughing, and all around, it was probably the most memorable presentation that professor and those students ever will see. In fact, it was so funny that I was dying laughing from him just telling me about it. And I wasn't even there. I really wish I was, or that someone recorded that presentation, because seeing it for myself probably would have made this even funnier. I challenged that 2D that when he takes strategic management during the spring 2025 semester, he has to try to beat this presentation and record it and send it to me. So maybe he'll do that so I can watch a similar presentation on video. That's basically how the first 30 minutes of the entire appointment went, as it took a while for the both of us to calm down since we were both laughing hysterically as he was talking about that presentation. But eventually, we calmed down and did some final exam review prep. The second really memorable appointment I want to discuss took place on the same day as this one, as it was my last appointment with the girl I met with for intermediate accounting from 5:30 to 6:30. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think I've ever had a 2D make fun of me as much as she did. At the same time, I don't think I've ever made fun of a 2D as much as I did with her, so it was a two-way thing. First and foremost, both of us enjoyed it, so there weren't any issues there. Now, for this last appointment, I helped her prepare for her final exam. All intermediate accounting professors design the exams themselves and the final the same way, as they try to make them mirror the CPA exam. While this worked great for me and other accounting majors, it proved to be really tough for non-accounting majors such as my 2D, who was an international business major. And even for accounting majors, these exams were tough. If you saw Storytime's 47, you know just how brutal intermediate accounting was for me and how tough these exams were, especially the final. So I was doing my best to help her with the final by telling her how the final was structured, what to expect, and reviewing the main things that would be on it. And overall, it was a great session. She clearly learned a lot from it and felt more confident about the final, so it was a successful session. However, like all final recurring appointments, the ending got quite emotional. Working with the 2D all semester and then wrapping up the semester was always sad. As I was glad to work with my 2Ds, it was sad seeing them go since I of course befriended them throughout the semester. Luckily, I'm not completely detached from my 2Ds, as I still keep in touch with many of them, but it was always sad having a last recurring appointment. But at the end of this session, my 2D basically thanked me for all my help throughout the semester, as tutoring proved to be extremely beneficial for her. However, after talking for a bit, she asked me for something I'll just say no 2D has ever asked for, that being a hug. Now, this caught me as a surprise, as the only times I would generally touch a 2D would be to shake their hands or fist bump, which many of my 2Ds would give me after each session. So when she asked for a hug, I was quite shocked. But of course I gave in and we hugged for a solid 3 seconds. It was hands down the most wholesome and most adorable moment I've ever had with a 2D, as it also made me feel really good and made me feel serene for the rest of the night. Overall, that 2D would go on to do great on her final, and as a result, she passed the class. So things all worked out for the both of us. I helped her do better in the class while she made my job even more enjoyable than it already was. So yeah, those appointments were really memorable and stuck out to me. These are appointments I will forever remember and look back on likely for the rest of my life. I would lead my very last tutoring appointment on Friday, April 26th, with the guy I saw for recurring appointments for statistics who really liked anime. And after that, I was officially done with tutoring appointments. Now, before I move on to discussing the reading day session, I want to talk about how I did this semester with tutoring. What I mean by are some of the things 2D said about me. After each session, I would email my 2Ds, where I'd thank them for the session, attach some extra practice materials in my schedule, and provide a link to the end of session evaluation survey. This survey allowed 2Ds to basically review how I did and how they thought the session went, as well as allowed them to make comments about the session. we tutors would receive our feedback at the end of the semester, and I reviewed these in order to see what tuties liked and what they didn't like so I can improve my practices. Even though it wasn't necessary this semester since it was my last semester, I still just wanted to see my reviews to see how well I did, and I think it's safe to say that I was probably one of the most popular and well-liked tutors in the entire tutoring department this semester. While I've always been very popular among tuties, it was this semester that I received by far the most praise. But by far the biggest highlight of these reviews were the comments tuties made. I'll go ahead and read them since every time I do, I always blush a ton. Best tutor at UNCC. No additional comments beside the fact that I feel better about my success in this course. Zach is the best tutor at UNCC. He knows almost every course material and does a great way incorporating it to real-life examples and careers. And then here's probably the greatest comment I've ever received by a tutie, and one that genuinely makes me happy every time I read it. Zach is so friendly and sweet. He makes you feel comfortable with a subject you come in unsure about and leaves confidently. Every tutoring session, he greets me with an adorable smile and a couple of questions. He genuinely cares about your outside life outside of academics and your school life. Best tutor ever. Reading that comment 6 months later still makes me as happy as I did the first time I read that comment. It was just genuinely so sweet, and the fact that this tutie had a lot to say too just makes it so sweet and really satisfying because it tells me that I did an incredible job as a tutor and I had a real impact on my tuties. I have a feeling on which tutie wrote this comment, but of course I'm not going to say since the survey entries were anonymous and I want to keep that tutie anonymous. And now we've made it to Tuesday, April 30th, the day of my reading day review session and my very last day on the job as a peer tutor. There's a lot to go over with regards to it because this is my big day and I had been preparing for over a month at this point. I created a reading day review packet, created the solutions to it with calculator shortcuts, and prepared and knew exactly how to teach and work out each problem on the packet. So it was time to showcase everything I had been working on. Now, how reading day review sessions worked is that we tutors, of course, created our review packets and solutions prior to the session, and then we use our reading day packet to do practice problems. Of course, that also requires us to study and become experts with our packets, which is what I did prior to the session. These sessions last 2 hours, although there is a 10-minute break halfway through in order to give us tutors a break from talking. Now, while we tutors, of course, led the session, the GAs and sometimes our boss would administer the sessions. So they would be in charge of checking in attendees, introducing the attendees at the beginning of the session, and announcing breaks, and announcing the end of the session. Now, in the previous reading day sessions I led, it was a GA who administered these sessions. But this session, the administrator was my boss's boss. She's basically the head of the entire department. So she's over tutoring, POW, academic support, and everything else related to the department. And being head of a pretty crucial department, her direct report is the Chancellor of UNC Charlotte. So she's really important. I didn't know she would be the one administering the session, so when I saw her setting up a table outside the lecture hall, I was surprised, but it built up a ton of motivation inside me and made me want to do as well as I could to make the tutoring center look great, especially since I would be leading the session in front of someone as important as her. Anyways, I was also surprised to see her already there when I arrived, since I arrived an entire hour early. My boss always recommended us reading day leaders to show up at least 30 minutes early to reading day sessions, although I always showed up an hour early so I could test technology and make sure I was set. So I was surprised to see my administrator already there, but at least it was cool talking with her for a few minutes and getting things set up. The setup process went very smoothly. I had no problems with technology and everything worked as anticipated. The projector also worked great and perfectly projected my packet and calculator, which was necessary since I chose to do these problems on paper and pencil. And then a little while later, the session started. By then, over 100 attendees had shown up and it hit 1 o'clock, the start of the session. Many of my former tuties had shown up, including Mr. Lorax, the tutie I had for the last appointment, and many tuties whom I helped previously throughout the semester, either from appointments or drop-ins. So, once it hit 1, my administrator introduced everyone to the session. She first introduced herself and discussed her role throughout the session, and then she talked about the services that the department, such as tutoring, POW, and other stuff. She then introduced me, and after speaking for a little bit more, she gave me the floor. Now to start, I also introduced myself a bit. I didn't have to, but I did want to come off as a little more personal and relatable in order to ensure everyone that they were someone who knew his shit. So I started by telling everyone about my experience taking this class back during the fall 2022 semester, and talked about having over a year of experience tutoring this class. I did also mention that the experience would be coming to an end that day since I was graduating in a week and a half, where I was immediately met with tons of applause and congratulations, which made me feel really happy. And then I started with the material. So the way that finals work for this class is that they are common finals. Common finals are used for a select number of classes at UNC Charlotte, where all sections of a course take the same final exam at the same time and date. As a result, the format for these exams are the exact same across all sections. As for how the final is formatted for the statistics final, it's a two-part exam. The first part is multiple choice and is chronological in nature, so the first few questions will deal with material discussed at the beginning of the semester and work its way to the last few questions that discuss material at the end of the semester. The second part is free response, where there are three free response problems that are split into multiple parts. The first question is a one-variable hypothesis problem, the second question is a two-variable hypothesis problem, and the third question is a linear regression problem. Now, from experience tutoring this class, I find that students struggle with the most with the last three chapters of the course, the most, which entails what I just mentioned for the written response problems. Therefore, I decided that to start, I would work through the free response problems, and once I finished them, I'd move on to the multiple choice. But in addition to experience, I also knew that this would be the best to start with because I had students fill in a survey where they could select which topics they wanted to focus on the most. Unsurprisingly, those topics had the most votes, so I chose to go over them first. The survey was accessed from a Padlet hub that I created for the session, where I also had the materials posted, including the reading day review packet, the solutions to it, the formula sheet that they would be allowed to use during the exam, the formula sheet I created for the class, and other stuff. This Padlet would also be used by students in order to ask questions. I would check the Padlet very frequently to look for questions, which I'll get to in a bit. By the way, yes, students were provided the formula sheet for all exams in the final. It wasn't that useful since roughly 85% of the formulas can be done on the calculator, but it did its job and was helpful at times, especially with regards to linear regression since these couldn't be done on the calculator. In fact, I even printed this sheet out and used it during the session in order to teach my attendees how to use it, which my attendees would go on to really like, as I'll discuss later. Anyways, the first problem I went over was the one variable hypothesis test problem. Now, if you just randomly came across this packet, you would immediately know that I was the one who made it because the problems were very much pop culture-like and just generally more interesting compared to problems in the class. I made it this way because statistics is supposed to be extremely interesting and enjoyable due to how it can be applied to literally everything, yet it seems like professors and people who teach statistics make it really boring and difficult. Therefore, as a tutor, I would always make it interesting for 2Ds by making problems related to their field of study or interest. And I did something similar with this packet, where I created problems that covered a wide variety of different fields such as accounting, economics, meteorology, psychology, biology, and more. But I also included a lot of different pop culture stuff in the packet too, mostly related to anime, video games, and travel, so there's a lot of content in this packet that was definitely more interesting than the class material. Anyways, I worked through the first problem, explaining each part very well and even discussing what you would do differently had there been a different scenario. But by far my biggest strength working these problems and throughout the entire session was that I refused to move on until I had answered everyone's question. This was what I consider to have been my biggest weakness during this business calc reading day session during the fall 2023 semester, as I did not spend enough time answering questions in an effort to get through as much of the packet as I could. This time though, I wanted to make sure everyone was fine before moving on, so I did just that. I answered every question posted on the Padlet before continuing, and even after answering all the Padlet questions, I would ask everyone if they had any more questions. This allowed me to put special attention on topics that were garnering a lot of questions and help me review topics my attendees needed the most help on. After an hour, I finished up the final free response problem and answered everyone's questions, and then the break began. During this break, two girls, who were the first attendees to show up, talked to me asking about the accounting field, as both of them happened to be first-year accounting students. So I told them about it, some of the things we did in upper-level accounting classes, and gave them some advice. They thanked me and congratulated me as well. As minute as this interaction was, it was still really cool to talk with some accounting freshmen as a soon-to-be accounting graduate, which is why it stuck with me. In addition, Evan also arrived at the session, too. Although Evan had an interview during the first half of the session, he wanted to attend since it was my very last day on the job. We both tutored at the same time on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so he was very used to my tutoring technique and what I did during appointments. He wanted to see me do my job one last time, so he came in the second half. This was great for me, as my parents also wanted a video of me doing the session since they always wanted to see me tutor, so Evan was able to get 2 videos during the session that he sent to me, and I was then able to send to my parents. Anyways, the second half of the session involved me working with multiple choice problems. I chose to start halfway through the problems because I wanted to focus more on the later material since that was what most people struggled with. When I finished that stuff up, I moved on to the beginning of the packet and did just the packet chronologically for the rest of the session. Now, I unfortunately did not get through the entire thing, but I got through most of it, especially the important sections, so I was fine with that. But once I finished up one last problem, my administrator announced to everyone that it was the end of the session and thanked everyone for attending. I stayed put so people could ask questions or make comments, which were about 50-50. Half of the people who came up to me after the session asked questions, while the other half thanked me and congratulated me. Now, while I was taking questions and comments, my administrator was at the desk outside holding up a QR code for attendees to fill out in order to provide their feedback on the session. But in addition to providing the QR code, she was also eavesdropping on some of the conversations that the attendees were having, and these were extremely good conversations. When I finished answering questions, she actually came over, congratulated me on finishing the session and on my last day of tutoring, and then she told me about the things she overheard. The comments attendees had were nothing short of incredibly positive and filled with praise. The most common things attendees said were that I explained the material better than their professors, and that I myself should be a professor one day because I did so well explaining the stuff. She said that she 100% agreed, as she was very impressed with the session and that if I ever intended to go to grad school, she'd happily write a letter of recommendation. I thanked her and talked with her some more for a little while, and afterwards, we both took off. Now, Evan and another attendee who was good friends with Evan stayed, as they helped me pack my stuff up and invited me to lunch, which I took their offer on. We 3 went over to Social 704 and had lunch. It was a fun lunch and I enjoyed talking with them. Later that night, I would receive the official feedback that my attendees gave me via that survey. Unfortunately, I don't have access to this feedback, but from what I remember, it was 100% positive and I got a ton of praise from it. Most students praised me for taking the time to answer questions and make sure everyone was good with the material, in addition to me explaining how the calculator shortcuts worked and just being very effective at explaining things. So this only reassured me that I did very well during the session and made me feel all the more better about my performance on my last day of the job. As sad it was leaving tutoring, it felt amazing that I was able to wrap it up in this way. And that wraps up everything from April. God damn, this is a big month, which you'd expect it to be, given that it was my last full month of college. So now let's move on to my last month of college entirely, being May 2024. My graduation ceremony was May 10th, so we only have a week and a half of this month to discuss, but there was a ton of stuff that happened that I do want to talk about, so let's get to it. The first thing I'll discuss is my last day of work. Even though my last day of tutoring was from the Reading Day review session, I attended an end of semester party held for all tutoring staff on May 1st. During this party, us tutors, PAL leaders, and other staff would be recognized for our accomplishments throughout the semester, including those of us who are graduating, where we would receive special cords to wear at graduation, so I attended in order to receive my cord. Now, the celebration in of itself wasn't too special. I spent most of my time talking with Alex and Treyas, as Evan didn't attend since he had an exam. However, my boss did talk with me some, and she said that I was really popular with the GAs and other managers in the department. What happened was that my boss's boss, who was my administrator during the Reading Day session, pretty much spent that entire morning bragging about me and talking about how well I did and how I made the tutoring department look really good. This was really cool to hear, as now everyone knew how I had done great. But even cooler is that my boss told me that her boss had said that that was genuinely one of the greatest Reading Day sessions ever led, which blew me away since they've been doing Reading Day sessions for many years, even back when my mom was attending UNC Charlotte during the mid-90s. If you want numbers on that, that's around 1,000 total Reading Day sessions over 30 years, and my statistics Reading Day session was named one of the best sessions ever held among those 1,000. Yeah, it was that good of a session, so I was the talk of the town for the rest of the semester, and I probably still am since I wouldn't be surprised if my boss started using my session as a model for how Reading Day sessions should be conducted. And after that party, I was officially finished with all of my duties as a peer tutor. Overall, choosing to do this job was an incredible decision. From the time I began in January of 2023 to my last reading day review session, I got to meet with so many different people, help them succeed, and make an impact on them. It was an incredible job that was extremely rewarding and satisfying that also allowed me to utilize what I had learned in my classes and apply them. It was a fantastic opportunity, and I am ever so grateful for my now former boss and the tutoring department for providing this opportunity for me. Who knew a random email from the tutoring department encouraging me to apply to be a peer tutor would result in a good chunk of events from the spring 2023, summer 2023, fall 2023, and spring 2024 semesters. I sure did not expect that when I applied, but it happened and I am so glad it did, as it enhanced my time at UNC Charlotte in a way no other opportunity would have. And with that all said, let's talk about my last few finals. So the first final I'll discuss is the one for managerial accounting. This final took place on Thursday, May 2nd. It was an 8 a.m., which sucked since I had to get up really early. However, it was a really low stakes exam, as I only needed a grade in the single digits to maintain an A. So theoretically, I could have just slept in and not even taken the exam and still passed with a really high B, but I chose to take it anyway since I wanted to keep an A in the class. Now, I did not study for this exam at all. While that meant that I would have been bringing my grade down to under 100, I honestly didn't care too much since at the end of the day, my transcript would simply say A and not 105. So I still sat for the exam, but I didn't study for it. Anyways, the exam was formatted similarly to our first two exams, just that it was longer and was cumulative. And as you might expect, I was also completely fucking bombed. I've completely fucking bombed this exam, making a 52 on it. Yup, I made a 52 on this final. Normally students would be freaking out over that, and I normally would be too. But again, to keep an A, I literally just needed to answer a single question correct. As a result, I didn't spend much time on this exam, only spending like 30 minutes on it despite most of the exam being calculation based. But as a result of this 52, I made a 94 in the class, giving me an A in this class and had probably the least stressful final exam I ever took. After that exam, I had a few days before my last two exams, which were both on Monday, May 6th. This gave me time to study for them since these exams, unlike the managerial accounting exam, were exams that required studying. Anyways, other than a fire alarm going off on that Saturday, nothing else really happened during this time. So let's skip over to Monday, May 6th, aka the day I took my very last exams for college. The first exam I took was for intermediate microeconomics. It worked basically the same way as the previous two exams, as most of the questions came from Pearson. It was also not cumulative, although there were more questions on it than other exams. Despite having more questions at 40 total, I breezed through the exam, completing it in less than an hour, and I ended up making an 85 on it, solidifying an A on it. Our professor then curved it, giving me a 93 on this exam and a 97 in the class, making this class tie with Principles of Accounting 1 and Statistics as the second highest grade I made in a class at UNC Charlotte. And in that night, I took my last exam of not only the semester, but of my entire time at UNC Charlotte and the last graded thing I did in my entire academic career. This exam was for intermediate macroeconomics. So the way our professor designed this exam is that he wrote a total of 10 questions, but we only had to answer 8 of them. They were all free response and only material from the second half of the course, so nothing prior to the midterm. Now, while this exam I was worried about the most given my experience with the midterm, even though I made a 100 on the midterm, I was still scared about what particularly was going to be on this exam. However, to my complete surprise, this exam would be really easy, as all the questions were related to the big topics that I put a lot of time into, so I was easily able to answer these questions. Additionally, there was even a bonus question where we simply had to write about one topic we think that will stick. I decided to talk about the solo model for it, but I finished this exam really quickly, as I finished it in only like 35 minutes. Once I was done, I handed it to my professor and right then and there marked my official last graded assignment I ever did in my academic career. To say that it was satisfying that was done would be an understatement, as I genuinely felt like I was on top of the world upon turning in that last exam. I felt like nothing could stop me and that I had accomplished something massive, which of course I did since graduating from college is a massive achievement. And what's really cool is that I ended up making a 94 on this exam. This was super neat because back in high school, the very last graded assignment I did was an exam for civics and economics, and I made a 94 on it. So it was a really funny how that happened, that both of my last exams for high school and college were for economics classes, and I made a 94 on both of them. I also made a 94 in intermediate macroeconomics, giving me an A for this class, meaning I completed my last semester at UNC Charlotte with 4 A's and 1 B, giving me a semester GPA of 3.8, the highest semester GPA I had for a semester if you don't count the summer semesters. My overall GPA from all classes I took at UNC Charlotte came out to be a 3.69, giving me the honor of cum laude at graduation. Now, before I get to graduation, I first want to talk about the rest of the final week. So that Wednesday, May 8th, Evan came over to my dorm and we hung out some. I ordered pizza and we spent the day playing Minecraft. However, that night would be pretty funny, so at around 11 o'clock, I got a call from Evan, except Evan was actually super drunk. During this time, I was teaching myself linear algebra and sent some pictures to Evan. In this call, Evan claimed that I was a great math magician and that I was writing in Greek symbols. I thought this was really funny since Evan's the math major, and yet when he's drunk, he can't decipher math from magic. I asked if he needed a designated driver since I knew he was at a party, but he didn't need one since he already had one, so he didn't need my help. He would later go on to thank me for offering it though. The rest of the week was just me chilling and packing things up. Since I was graduating senior, I didn't have to move out until Sunday, May 12th, although I chose to move out right after graduation since my parents of course were already there, meaning I had to spend some time packing this week, which is what I did. And that brings us to Friday, May 10th, the date of my graduation ceremony, a day I had been working towards for not just 2.5 years, but a day I had been working towards for pretty much my entire life. It was pretty much expected of me that I would be going to college since I was very young, and I've also had that expectation for myself as well, and now I had done it. And it all started 17 years ago, when I was enrolled in preschool for the 2007 to 2008 school year. I did preschool at the same elementary school I attended through 5th grade. I was well liked in elementary school and very popular among my peers and teachers, especially during the 5th grade. But unfortunately, I would not carry this popularity to middle school, as after 5th grade, I was transferred to a new school district, where I attended an intermediate school for 6th grade. This was the second hardest school year of my academic career, as trying to get used to a completely new school, interacting with completely different people, and being the only new student was incredibly tough. Luckily, I persevered and was successful in 6th grade. Then, for 7th and 8th grade, I attended the middle school my intermediate school funneled into. While 7th grade proved to be the best school year of my academic career, the same cannot be said for my 8th grade school year, the single hardest school year of my academic career and the hardest period of my entire life. From taking the hardest classes I ever took to being excessively bullied to suffering with depression, self-harm addiction, and suicidal ideology, this school year was hard. It got so bad that at one point, I thought I would be better off dead, and so at just 13 years old, I attempted to take my own life. Thankfully, my teachers were able to help me right before it was too late, and I was able to get professional help, allowing me to overcome these challenges and get right back on track and therefore have a successful 8th grade school year. Then for high school, I attended an early college. Here, I graduated with a high school diploma, associate's degree in science, and a business administration certificate on December 10th, 2021. I would also be exposed to the expeditionary learning curriculum in high school, where I would learn how learning should actually work. Although a year of high school was taken away from me due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I still succeeded and did very well, even during a global pandemic. In fact, I was so successful that I was able to graduate with all of my degrees a semester early, making me the first student and so far only one of 2 students at my high school's history to have ever done so. Then on January 7th, 2022, at just 17 years old, I officially started my journey at UNC Charlotte, where I moved into Hawthorne Hall, the dorm I stayed in for the spring 2022 semester. This first semester was very tough, as not only did I have to get used to the campus and understand how college classes work, but I would also have to learn how to room with someone who was much different than me. I succeeded, and as a result, my remaining time at UNC Charlotte would be easier. Additionally, I would also make a bigger impact on UNC Charlotte in my later semesters, including becoming a peer tutor and leading 3 reading day review sessions, making friends with and becoming close friends with other accounting students, and continuing to do well in my classes, all of which eventually led to this moment. So let's talk about my last day at UNC Charlotte. Now, the night before, I did not get much sleep, as I knew I had this really big day coming up, and therefore was only able to get around 3 hours of sleep. And even with those 3 hours, it wasn't that good of sleep. As a result, I was really tired all day, which definitely affected me some, but that would be taken care of later. Anyways, at 6:30, after struggling to fall asleep for an hour, I decided that I might as well get up and get ready, so I did that. I ate some breakfast and put on my cap and gown. I also put on my cords and stole. I had one stole that came with the cap and gown as well as 2 cords, one for being a tutor and one for graduating cum laude. Definitely not as much as high school where I wore like 2 stoles and 5 cords, but it was still significant since the majority of graduates didn't wear anything. I also wore a tan tassel to represent me being a business major. UNC Charlotte holds 4 graduation ceremonies each semester, with the first ceremony, being the one I attended and walked at, was for business and health graduates. So while it was obvious that I was a business graduate, I still got it colored for my tassel. Anyways, the graduation ceremony took place at the Halton Arena, which is where our basketball team plays. It wasn't that far of a walk. However, I had to be there by 8:30, so to make sure I was early, I took off at 8. When I arrived, I saw a bunch of other graduates waiting outside, so I knew I was in the right area and hung out there. That was until I saw Mio sitting on a bench, so I went over and talked with her. She was really happy to see me since nobody else that she knew arrived and she had been sitting there for 15 minutes, so we spent the next few minutes talking. Eventually, Anna and Jared arrived, so it was 4 of us then. Ting would arrive a little later. Then at 8:30, the doors open, allowing us all to enter and be processed in. We first had to go through security, and then we received a line number. The lines basically told us what we would, when we would walk the stage. Then each line, we had a place, indicating where in the line we were. I was in line 10 and placed 10th, meaning I was the 10th person to walk the stage. Now, we didn't have to immediately get in line, which while I did so in order to figure out where I was and such, it helped because by this point, I was extremely exhausted. Getting very little sleep the night before really took a lot of my energy and had me worn out, so much so that I had to stand outside for a little while. Mio actually saw me walk outside, so she came over and spent some time with me. Ting would also arrive around this time, so now all of us had made it. Eventually, after I regained some energy, we returned to our lines, where we were still able to chat since they were in nearby lines. There were also a few others I saw and talked to as well, including my former crush as well as Wesley. My intermediate accounting 1 and 2 professor is also working the graduation ceremony and helped people get to their spots, so I got to say hello to her as well, which was super nice because she was a fantastic professor who had a really big impact on me, so it was great seeing her again. And then once everyone was in, they then lined all of us up from lines 1 through I think 50 lines, and we made our way towards the outside of the Halton Arena. There we did some walking and then we stopped once we got to the entrance to the arena. Not the spectator entrance, by the way, it's where the players come out for the basketball game since the stage was on the basketball court. Our chancellor then made some comments, and afterwards, we graduates walked onto the field as everyone cheered for us. We then took our seats, and afterwards, our chancellor started talking again. As you might expect, I was seated at the very front, as row 1 sat at the front, so I got a good view of the stage. Just that this would not be the most optimal spot when we get to the end of the ceremony, and I'll discuss why in a bit. Anyways, the Chancellor started out by making some remarks about the graduating class. The class of 2024 was the largest undergraduate graduating class in UNC Charlotte's history, as it included over 5,000 students from over 30 states and 20 countries. At this particular ceremony, there were around 1,500 of us. Now, the really cool part is when she mentioned the age ranges, as the ages of us in the graduating class ranged from 19 to 72. Yup. The youngest graduate of the largest graduating class in UNC Charlotte's history was just 19 years old, and that graduate was none other than me. Definitely really cool to hear this since I knew she was talking about me upon mentioning the age range. After the Chancellor spoke, some more people spoke, and after they were all done saying what they were saying, it was time for them to introduce us graduates. So they of course started by gathering us row by row, and we made our way across the court and near the stage. My intermediate accounting professor from before was actually checking our cards that they gave us before we walked the stage, so they would know how to pronounce our name. I handed her my card, she congratulated me again, and then I walked the stage as they called my name. Shook hands with a few people there, and afterwards I sat back down. Now that I had walked the stage, I had the next 2 hours to just sit there. And as you might expect, it was boring. One thing they don't tell you about college graduation ceremonies is that they are super boring. This is the case for my community college graduation 2 years prior. Although it wasn't the case for high school since I knew everyone and we all said really stupid shit to whoever was walking the stage. Nonetheless, I was bored out of my mind, and it did not help that I was sleepy as fuck. In fact, I almost fell asleep on multiple occasions as they were announcing people. I was that bored and tired. Now there were some not so boring times though, specifically when someone I knew walked the stage. During those times, I'd cheer for my friends, otherwise, I'd usually was completely out of it. But once the last person walked, we all then cheered as the chancellor said some more words. She then got the student body president, who was also graduating with us, to close out the ceremony. He started out by saying some words to us. Afterwards, he rang a bell 9 times to represent each individual school of UNC Charlotte and UNC Charlotte itself. Once he rang the bell, he guided us in the turning of our tassels, where we replaced our tassels on the left side of our cap. And right as we did this, he officially congratulated us and everyone erupted in applause. But right after he congratulated us, some confetti was shot directly in front of the stage. Since I was of course in front of the stage too, this meant that the confetti was really close to me. It didn't hit me, but it was super loud and scared the ever-living fuck out of me. In fact, it scared me so much that it woke me up, so at least I wouldn't have to worry about being drowsy for a little while later. After that, we were all then guided outside and into the courtyard in front of Medbane Hall, meaning commencement was officially finished. I made my way over to my family, who had texted me where they were, where I greeted them and got some pictures. We can have up to 8 guests attend. I invited my mom, dad, sister, 2 grandmothers, and 2 of my aunts. Now, while taking pictures, I'd see my intermediate counting 3 professor. Mom got a picture of us 2 and he congratulated me. Additionally, I'd come across Wesley again. Mom would get our pictures, and I also learned that Wesley knows my aunt, which surprised me quite a bit, but it was cool to see that we somehow had that connection. Once we got pictures taken, we headed over to my dorm to get started on the moving out phase. Since I already had everything packed, we just had to get things out of the room and into my mom's van in my truck. The only problem was that the goddamn elevator was not fixed on move-out day. Yeah, it had been broken since the fall semester, and they were still not able to get it fixed by move-out day. Shows just how pathetic housing and residence life is. Nonetheless, we got everything out and moved out into the vehicles. Once we got everything in, we officially took off, where my time at UNC Charlotte officially came to an end. On the way home, we stopped and ate lunch. I was really tired since my sleepiness came back, so I didn't eat too much. Additionally, I was also somewhat sore from carrying stuff, so I was really tired. But after eating, we officially made it back to my parents' house. I chose not to move out immediately, as I instead brought a couple of things in and afterwards, I went to sleep. My sister attended her high school's prom that night, meaning I had the house to myself since my parents wanted to escort her there and did a date night while she was at prom, so I spent the next few hours asleep. I wake back up at around 8 o'clock, but I would go back to sleep at 1 and sleep until noon. Reminding me of how I slept the night of December 10th, 2021, the day I graduated high school, where I slept for a whole 13 hours that night after a super emotional day. And with that, my friends, officially wraps up my last semester at UNC Charlotte. While it wasn't nearly as fun as the fall 2023 semester, it was still an extremely crucial semester for me that allowed me to wrap up a very pivotal period of my life. I will forever look back on my college experience, as while there were many challenges and bad things, especially during the spring 2022 and fall 2022 semesters, my experience was overall a fantastic one, and I'll always remember the great moments, as there were so many great things that happened to me and things I did at UNC Charlotte. From making so many friends to being a valuable asset for fellow Niners, to living on my own for the first time to doing so many other things, I had a great experience at UNC Charlotte. Now, that begs the question, what next? Well, had I written and recorded the Storytime in June like I was supposed to, it would all be speculative, but since I'm writing and recording it 5 months after the fact, I could be definitive about how things are going. So, over the summer, I did a purchasing internship at my dad's company. Dad works as a purchasing manager, and he was able to talk his boss into letting me work over the summer as an intern. During my internship, I got to work with my dad and his coworkers in purchasing. I achieved a lot during this internship, including creating an organizational system for the purchasing team and saving the company over $100,000 by finding synergies with our subsidiary. Overall, this was a super successful internship, as in addition to my accomplishments, I also got to make some good money and got exposure to the corporate world. I would do this internship for 3 months, as afterwards, I would officially move into my own apartment. I signed a lease with an apartment in Uptown Charlotte and moved in late August, and that's where I live today. I did this because in early September, I officially started with the accounting job I landed a year prior. As a reminder, in September of 2023, I managed to land a corporate tax position at a large public accounting firm in Charlotte. I'm obviously not going to say which one it is, or even if it's Big 4, Big 10, Big 25, or regional, but I will say that it's a big firm and it's where I've been employed since September. While I will only go into the office twice a week, the office is also located in Uptown Charlotte, which is really convenient for me since on my in-office days, I just have to walk 10 minutes over there, so it's super convenient. That's also why I chose to live in Uptown as opposed to another Charlotte neighborhood or suburb, as I love just walking to work instead of having to sit through traffic. Now, as for my plans for this company, I'm currently on the partner track. So how public accounting works is that you start as an associate and then move up to senior associate. Afterwards you hit manager, then senior manager, then director, then managing director, and finally partner. Partners are the ones who own ownership in the firm. They're the ones who sign off on tax returns and audits and are basically the leaders of the firm. They also make a ridiculous amount of money. And of course, as someone who loves money, my goal is to eventually work my ranks up to reach partner one day. Just that I will have to focus on the steps first before I can work towards partner, which I expect it will take around 15 years for me to reach. Now, while I see myself eventually doing this, there's one big roadblock. The roadblock being that in order to be promoted to manager, you have to have your CPA license. And to get your CPA license, you have to take the CPA exam. The CPA exam consists of 4 individual sections that test your accounting knowledge in all different fields of different accounting fields, from financial accounting and financial reporting to tax and to audit. It's a very difficult exam, but I am currently in the process of studying since my company provides study materials for us associates. I'm currently studying for the tax exam, called a reg, which I figured would be good to start out with since I work in tax and did really well in my tax class. I'm not really doing too much right now since I just started with the firm and I'm more interested in getting acquainted with the firm, but probably in 2025, I'll be taking studying a lot more seriously and hopefully have reg taken by next summer. And that's where I'm at today. Definitely got a lot going right now, and I'll have even more happening next year, but I'll be sure to update you all in the future story times on how things are going. Unfortunately, I will not be able to discuss what I do specifically in my job since I work with confidential client information, but I'll still update you all and talk about how things are going. With that said, thank you all for watching, and